I spent 10 years restoring the car my late father gave me. When I found the garage empty, my wife said, "I sold it. I wanted a trip to Paris. Get over it." I was devastated. Until the dealer called. "Sir, your father left something inside. You need to come now." Before I reveal everything that happened to me, go grab your copy of the audiobook, Brutal Cheating Stories That Shocked the World. It's raw, real, and 10 times wilder than what you're hearing right now. Link in the pinned comment. I'm not a man who cries easily. I once hit my thumb with a wrench so hard that I saw my ancestors having a family reunion in the clouds, complete with Great Aunt Edna's potato salad. And I didn't even flinch. Didn't curse. Didn't shed a single tear. Just wrapped it in duct tape and finished installing the carburetor like a real American should. But that morning, that godforsaken Tuesday morning in late September, I stood there in my ratty plaid slippers, the ones with the hole in the left toe that Harper kept threatening to throw away, staring at an empty garage like a widower in one of those depressing car insurance commercials where everyone's crying over a Camry. The garage door was wide open. That was my first clue something had gone catastrophically wrong. See, my wife Harper never went in there. Said it smelled like old metal and bad decisions, which was rich coming from someone who once bought a timeshare in Florida after 3 glasses of Chardonnay. But there I was, coffee mug in hand, staring at the empty concrete slab where my baby used to sit. The 1968 Mustang Fastback, candy apple red with white racing stripes. The one my late father gave me on my 30th birthday with tears in his eyes and grease under his fingernails. Gone. Vanished. 10 years of restoration work, countless Saturday afternoons, bruised knuckles, and YouTube tutorials watched at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep until I figured out that damn transmission issue. All of it, just gone in one night. I stood there doing the math in my head, trying to convince myself I was still asleep. Maybe this was a nightmare. Maybe I'd eaten bad Chinese food and my subconscious was punishing me with this automotive horror show. But no. The morning sun was real, the birds were chirping their stupid, cheerful songs, and my garage was as empty as a politician's promise. There wasn't even an oil stain left behind. It was like my car had been raptured, and apparently, I wasn't worthy enough to go with it. When Harper walked into the garage holding one of those green smoothies that probably cost more than my monthly internet bill, wearing her yoga pants, and that smug post-workout glow, I asked the question even though part of me already knew the answer would destroy me. Where's the Mustang? She didn't even blink. Didn't pause. Didn't do that thing where guilty people look away or fidget. She just took a long sip of her kale and whatever the hell else concoction and said, as casually as if she were commenting on the weather, "Oh, I sold it. We needed the money for Paris. Get over it. Get over it. Get over it." Like I'd just lost my favorite pen or something. I could barely get over breakfast without having an existential crisis about whether I'd added enough sugar to my coffee, and she wanted me to just get over the fact that she'd sold my father's legacy, my therapy sessions, my entire emotional support system on 4 wheels. That car wasn't just transportation, it was my history. It was every Sunday my dad and I spent in his driveway teaching me the difference between a socket wrench and a box wrench. It was my retirement plan, my stress relief, my connection to a man who'd been dead for 3 years, but somehow still felt present every time I slid behind that steering wheel. She sipped her smoothie again, the sound somehow more offensive than nails on a chalkboard. "Relax, Mason. It's just a car. We can get you another one when we're not broke. Just a car. Just a car." My father's ashes could have been in the glove box for all I knew. Hell, knowing Dad, they probably should have been. He loved that car more than he loved most people, present company included. And Harper had just sold it like it was a used microwave on Craigslist to fund her little eat, pray, love fantasy in Paris because apparently, her book club had decided that 40 was the new, I need to find myself in Europe on someone else's dime. I didn't yell. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to scream until the neighbors called the cops, and I became that guy on the local news with the blurred-out face. But I didn't. I didn't curse, didn't throw my coffee mug, didn't do any of the dramatic things you see in movies when someone's world collapses. I just stood there in my stupid slippers with the hole in the toe, thinking one crystal-clear thought. This woman would sell my kidneys on the black market if she found a buyer willing to throw in a first-class ticket to the Amalfi Coast. "How much did you get for it?" I finally asked, my voice sounding weird and hollow even to my own ears. 35,000, she said, like she'd just announced she'd won the lottery. The guy didn't even try to negotiate. He just showed up with cash and a trailer. Super easy. $35,000. For a car worth easily 3 times that to the right collector. My dad had spent 40 years building relationships in the classic car community, and I'd spent a decade restoring every inch of that vehicle to showroom condition. The engine alone was worth 20 grand. But sure, Harper, great negotiating. Really knocked it out of the park there. I was surprised she hadn't thrown in my tools and my dignity for free. Who did you sell it to? I asked, already knowing she probably hadn't bothered to write down a name or get a receipt or do any of the basic things a functional adult would do when selling a vehicle. She waved her hand dismissively, nearly spilling her green sludge. Some guy from a classic car shop. Garner something? He said he knew your dad. Seemed legit. She checked her phone, already bored with the conversation that was quietly ending my will to live. Anyway, I booked our flights for next month. We're staying in the Marais district. Very chic. We're staying. She'd already decided I was going. Like I was just going to pack my bags and skip off to France while my father's legacy sat in some stranger's garage. Like I was the kind of man who could just get over something like this because my wife needed to post Instagram photos in front of the Eiffel Tower to prove to her high school friends that she'd made it. I turned around and walked back into the house, leaving her standing there in the empty garage with her smoothie and her plans, and her complete inability to understand that she'd just nuked the last good thing I had connecting me to my father. I walked past the living room where her yoga mat was still rolled out, past the kitchen where her expensive espresso machine sat and used because she preferred overpriced coffee shop lattes, and straight to the bathroom where I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. The guy looking back at me looked tired. Not just didn't sleep well tired, but made a series of catastrophically bad life choices tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes you wonder when exactly you stopped recognizing yourself. When had I become the kind of man who let someone sell his soul disguised as a 1968 Mustang Fastback? When had I become so passive that I hadn't even noticed my wife was capable of this level of betrayal? I splashed cold water on my face and made myself a promise right there, dripping wet and staring at my pathetic reflection. I wasn't going to cry about this. I was going to figure out what the hell had just happened, get my car back, and maybe, just maybe, figure out when my marriage had turned into a hostage situation where I was both the hostage and the ransom. Later that day, after I'd spent a solid hour contemplating whether it was legal to sell your spouse's belongings on eBay as revenge, I grabbed the keys to my dad's old Ford F-150 and got the hell out of there. The truck was a 1985 beast that ran on pure spite and had a suspension system that made every pothole feel like a personal attack from God. But at least Harper hadn't managed to sell it yet. Probably because she couldn't figure out how to operate the manual transmission, which required both brain cells and coordination, 2 things she apparently didn't possess when she decided to trade my inheritance for croissants and overpriced wine. The truck coughed to life like a 70-year-old chain smoker, and I pulled out of the driveway without saying goodbye. Harper was inside doing some kind of online yoga class, probably one of those where the instructor says things like, breathe into your discomfort and release what no longer serves you. Well, Harper had certainly released what no longer served her, my father's car, my emotional stability, and apparently any remaining shred of my trust. My phone buzzed at the first red light. A text from Harper. You're overreacting. It's not like the car had feelings. Oh sure, Harper. Tell that to the man who talked to his Mustang more than his therapist. Tell that to the guy who apologized to the car when he accidentally scratched it backing out of the garage in 2019. I'd named the damn thing Cherry after the candy apple red paint job, and I'd spent more quality time with her than I'd spent with my own wife in the last 2 years. But no, you're right. The car didn't have feelings. Just me. Stupid, sentimental me with my attachment issues and my inability to understand that everything can be monetized if you're sociopathic enough. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to Gavin's workshop on the south side of town, a place that smelled like motor oil, welding fumes, and the kind of honest work that made you feel like maybe humanity wasn't completely garbage. Gavin Murphy had been my best friend since high school, back when we were both dumb enough to think we'd be professional skateboarders or rock stars or literally anything other than middle-aged guys with back pain and regrets. He ran an auto body shop out of a converted warehouse, and he still owed me $40 from 2008 when I'd spotted him cash for concert tickets to see some band we both pretended was going to be legendary, but broke up 3 months later. I found him under a Chevy Impala, cursing in Spanish even though he was Irish and had never been south of Kentucky. That was just Gavin. He believed cursing in other languages was more sophisticated. "Yo, Murphy," I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. He rolled out from under the car on one of those creeper things, looking like a mechanic in a music video, grease-stained wife beater, backwards cap, the whole 9 yards. "Hayes, what brings you to my humble establishment?" "Wait," he squinted at me. "You look like someone just told you Santa isn't real. What happened?" I pulled up a folding chair that had definitely seen better decades and sat down heavily. "Harper sold my Mustang." Gavin's face went through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally settling on that specific kind of sympathy men give each other when they know words won't fix it, but they have to say something anyway. "Your dad's car? The one you've been working on since forever?" "Yep. For a vacation to Paris. She got 35 grand for it." 35. Gavin shot up so fast he nearly knocked over his toolbox. That car was worth at least 100, maybe more to the right buyer. What the hell was she thinking? She wasn't thinking, I mean. She just saw dollar signs and Eiffel Tower selfies and decided my feelings could take a back seat to her Instagram aesthetic. Gavin grabbed 2 beers from a mini fridge that was older than both of us combined and handed me one. It was barely noon, but honestly, the sun was over the yardarm somewhere, and I'd already lived through enough trauma for one day. "So what are you going to do?" he asked, popping the cap off with his teeth like an absolute maniac. "I don't know, man. Part of me wants to file for divorce immediately. The other part wants to sell all her stuff and see how she likes it. Maybe auction off her collection of decorative pillows that serve no actual purpose. Slightly used throw pillow, looks pretty, does nothing, kind of like my marriage, starting bid $1. Gavin laughed so hard, he almost inhaled his beer. "Dude, if my wife sold my Harley, I'd fake my own death and start over in Canada. New name, new life, new everything. I'd become a lumberjack named Jacques who only speaks French and has no memory of his previous existence." That actually sounded appealing. Canada. Maple syrup. Silence. Moose. No Harper explaining why we needed a vacation we couldn't afford while simultaneously selling off my most prized possession. I could learn to say sorry about everything and blend right in. "The worst part," I continued, taking a long pull from my beer, "is that she doesn't even get why I'm upset. She literally said, 'Get over it,' like I'd lost a tire iron or something. This was my dad's car, Gav. The last thing he gave me before he died. I have pictures of him teaching me to drive in that car. I have memories of us spending every weekend in his garage, and he'd tell me stories about the original owner, and we'd listen to the oldies station, and I stopped because my voice was doing that thing where it gets all weird and tight, and I'd already promised myself I wasn't going to cry about this." Gavin nodded slowly, his face serious now. "Harper's always been a little, what's the word? Self-absorbed? But this is next level. This is like supervillain behavior. This is, I'm going to steal Christmas energy. She texted me that the car didn't have feelings. Like that's the point. Jesus Christ. What did you text back? Nothing. What am I supposed to say? Actually, honey, the car might not have feelings, but I do. And right now they're all telling me you're a terrible person. That'll go over great." We sat there for a while, drinking our beers and listening to the radio playing classic rock in the background. Leonard Skinner was singing about a simple kind of man, and I thought, yeah, that's me. A simple man who just wanted his car and his peace of mind, and maybe a wife who didn't view his possessions as liquid assets for her personal European vacation fund. "You should talk to a lawyer," Gavin finally said. "I'm serious, man. This feels like the beginning of something worse." "Like what's next?" "She sells the house for a spa weekend in Bali." I hadn't thought about that, but now that he mentioned it, it didn't seem that far-fetched. Harper had been making comments lately about how our house was too much work and how we should downsize to something more manageable, which I was now realizing was probably code for something I can sell without you noticing until it's too late. I finished my beer and stood up, suddenly exhausted. "Thanks for listening, man. And for the beer." And for not telling me I'm being dramatic. You're not being dramatic. You're being a human being with normal human emotions. Harper's the one who's broken. He paused. Also, you still owe me for that pizza in 2015. You owe me $40 from 2008. Ancient history, my friend. Ancient history. I drove home that night as the sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and purples that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so miserable. When I pulled into the driveway, I deliberately parked where the Mustang used to sit, like I could somehow fill the void with this crappy old truck. It didn't work. The empty space felt bigger somehow, like a black hole that was slowly consuming everything good in my life. Inside, Harper was asleep on the couch, her laptop still open to some travel blog about 10 must-see hidden gems in Paris. I stood there watching her sleep, wondering when exactly I'd stopped knowing her. Or maybe I'd never known her at all. Maybe I'd just been so desperate for companionship after Dad died that I'd ignored all the red flags waving frantically in my peripheral vision. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty spot where my car used to sit, and it looked less like a garage and more like a crime scene for broken dreams and murdered trust. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I got up and stood in the garage in my pajamas, staring at the oil stain I'd been too distraught to notice earlier. At least she'd left me that, a ghost made of petroleum and regret. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, then reversed over for good measure, then maybe run over one more time, just to make sure the job was done. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, listening to Harper snore like a congested walrus, and wondering if this was what the rest of my life looked like. Married to a woman who viewed my emotional attachments as inconvenient obstacles to her travel influencer dreams. Spoiler alert, I didn't like the answer. I dragged myself to the kitchen around 7 and made coffee so strong it could probably power a small European nation. Harper was still asleep, which was a blessing because I wasn't sure I could look at her without saying something that would require either marriage counseling or a good lawyer. Probably both. I was halfway through my 3rd cup of this bitter, life-sustaining sludge, contemplating whether it was too early to start day drinking, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Fantastic. Probably some scammer calling to tell me I'd won a free cruise or that my car's extended warranty was about to expire. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on me, considering my car was currently sitting in some stranger's possession, probably wondering why I'd abandoned her to whatever fate Harper had sold her into. I answered anyway because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Yeah, Mr. Hayes? The voice on the other end was gravelly, like someone who'd spent 40 years smoking unfiltered cigarettes and yelling at people to get off his lawn. Mason Hayes. Depends who's asking, I said, taking another sip of my coffee. If this is about my extended warranty, I've already suffered enough this week, and I'm not in the mood for whatever you're selling. The man chuckled, a rough sound that somehow felt genuine. This is Tom Garner from Garner Classic Auto. I believe I have your car. I froze. The coffee mug stopped halfway to my mouth, suspended in time like someone had hit pause on my entire existence. My car? The Mustang. Yes, sir. Your wife sold it to me yesterday afternoon. Brought it in on a flatbed, signed all the paperwork, took the cash and left. But Mr. Hayes, there's something you need to see. Something your father left inside. I nearly dropped the phone. My hand started shaking, which was inconvenient because I was still holding hot coffee and burning myself seemed like adding insult to injury at this point. Inside the car? What are you talking about? There was a pause on the other end, like Tom was choosing his words carefully. It's unusual, and I think it's something your father meant for you to find. Personally, can you come down to the shop right now? My brain was doing that thing where it tries to process too much information at once and just sort of short circuits instead. My dad left something in the car? The car I'd been working on for 10 years? The car I'd restored from the inside out, replacing every part, checking every compartment? How had I missed something? Mr. Garner, I've been all through that car. Every inch. I rebuilt the engine, redid the interior, checked under every seat and in every crevice. What could possibly be? Mr. Hayes, he interrupted gently. Your father was a smart man, and I knew him well, real well. He asked me to install something 2 years ago, right before he passed. Made me promise not to tell you unless the car ever left your possession. He paused. I'm guessing from your wife's demeanor yesterday, you didn't know she was selling it. That would be a correct assumption, I said through gritted teeth. She decided to fund a Paris vacation with my inheritance. Real classy move. Tom made a sound that was half grunt, half sigh. Your father warned me she might be trouble. Told me to keep an eye out. Said she had. How'd he put it? Champagne tastes and a complete disregard for other people's feelings. I almost laughed. That sounded exactly like something Dad would say. He'd never liked Harper, even though he'd been polite to her face. I remembered him pulling me aside at our wedding, his hand heavy on my shoulder, saying, "Son, I love you, but that woman's gonna cost you more than money. Watch yourself." I'd been too in love, or too stupid, probably both, to listen. So what did he leave? I asked, my heart doing this weird hammering thing against my ribs. What's in the car? I think it's better if you see it yourself. How soon can you get here? I looked at the clock. 7:45 in the morning. Give me 30 minutes. What's the address? He rattled off a location on the industrial side of town, near the old railroad tracks where all the serious gearheads had their shops. I scribbled it down on the back of a junk mail envelope. Ironic, considering the envelope was advertising a vacation package to Europe, and was about to hang up when Harper's voice pierced through the morning quiet like an air horn at a funeral. If that's the pizza guy, tell him to add extra olives. I stared at my phone, then toward the living room where Harper had apparently woken up and immediately started thinking about food. Pizza. At 7:45 in the morning. Because that was totally normal and not at all a sign that my wife might be having some kind of breakdown. Or maybe she was just Harper, and this was standard operating procedure. Mr. Hayes? Tom's voice brought me back to reality. Sorry, that was my wife. She thinks you're delivering pizza. I rubbed my face with my free hand. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up before he could respond, grabbed my keys from the counter, and headed for the door. Harper wandered into the kitchen wearing one of my old t-shirts. The Metallica one from their 1991 tour that I'd specifically told her not to wear because it was basically a religious artifact at this point, and looked at me with bleary eyes. Where are you going? She asked, opening the fridge and pulling out leftover Chinese food. From 3 days ago. That was definitely going to give her food poisoning, but honestly, at this point, karma could handle that situation. Out, I said, not bothering to elaborate. If she wanted details, she should have thought about that before selling my car. Out where? We need to talk about the Paris itinerary. I found this amazing restaurant in the Latin Quarter that. Harper, I interrupted, my hand on the doorknob. I really don't give a damn about Paris right now. She blinked at me like I'd just spoken ancient Sumerian. What's your problem? You've been weird since yesterday. It's just a car, Mason. We can get you another one when we get back from. Stop, I said, holding up my hand. Just stop talking. I'll be back later. I walked out before she could respond, before she could launch into another speech about how I was being unreasonable or dramatic or whatever other adjective she'd picked up from her therapy podcasts. The morning air was crisp and cool, the kind of October morning that usually made me feel alive and grateful. Today it just felt like a reminder that another day had started, and I was still married to someone who thought my emotional attachments were negotiable. The drive to Garner's shop took exactly 18 minutes because I may have broken a few speed limits and definitely ran a yellow light that was more red than yellow, but desperate times and all that. The whole way there, my mind was racing. What had my father left in the car? Why had he hidden it? And why had he told Tom Garner about it, but not me? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Dad had gotten sick fast. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't mess around or give you time to get your affairs in order. But he'd been sharp until almost the very end, sharp enough to know that Harper was bad news, sharp enough to suspect she might do something exactly like this. Had he planned for this? Had he somehow known that one day I'd be driving across town to discover whatever secret he'd tucked away in that Mustang? I pulled up to Garner Classic Auto just as the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the industrial lot. The building was exactly what you'd expect. Corrugated metal siding, hand-painted sign, rows of vintage cars in various states of restoration parked outside like soldiers waiting for deployment. It looked like the kind of place where men came to remember who they used to be before mortgages and marriages and mediocrity had beaten them down. I parked the truck and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Whatever was in that car, whatever my father had left me, I had a feeling it was about to change everything. For better or worse. I was about to get a message from beyond the grave. And knowing my dad's sense of humor, It probably wasn't going to be Mary Smarter next time, but honestly, that ship had already sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean where the fish were using my good judgment as a reef. I got out of the truck and walked toward the shop like a man heading to his own execution, except instead of a firing squad, I was about to face whatever cryptic message my dead father had decided to leave me in a car I'd been driving for a decade without knowing it was there. The irony wasn't lost on me. My dad always did have a flair for the dramatic, even if his version of drama usually involved timing belts and torque specifications rather than actual human emotion. The front door had one of those bells that jangled when you opened it, the kind that made you feel like you were walking into a 1950s hardware store where everyone knew your name and your business. Inside, the shop smelled like heaven, or at least what heaven smells like if you're the kind of person who gets emotional about motor oil and believes that WD-40 can fix most of life's problems. Vintage car parts lined the walls like trophies, and somewhere in the back, I could hear the sound of an air compressor and classic rock radio playing Born to Run. Bruce Springsteen, my dad's favorite. Mr. Hayes, a man emerged from the back office, and I knew immediately this was Tom Garner. He looked exactly like his voice sounded, mid-60s, silver hair that had probably been dark once upon a time, weathered face with the kind of lines that come from squinting at engine blocks in the sun for 40 years, and eyes that were tired but kind. He wore a denim shirt with Garner Classic Auto embroidered on the pocket, and his handshake was firm enough to make me think he could probably still bench press a transmission if the mood struck him. "That's me," I said. "Thanks for calling. I've been losing my mind since yesterday." Tom nodded sympathetically and gestured for me to follow him deeper into the shop. "Your dad was a good man," he said as we walked past a gorgeous '67 Corvette that was missing its engine. "One of the best I ever knew. We go way back. Hell, we go so far back that I remember when he bought that Mustang brand new off the lot in 1968. He was 23 years old, fresh out of the Army, had saved up every penny for 2 years to buy that car. I didn't know that. Dad had told me he'd gotten the car young, but I'd never known the specific details. It occurred to me, not for the first time, that maybe I should have asked more questions while he was still alive to answer them. He helped me get this place started 25 years ago," Tom continued, leading me through a doorway into the main garage bay. "I was broke. Couldn't get a loan from any bank in town because apparently having a dream and a decent work ethic wasn't enough collateral. Your dad gave me $15,000 out of his own pocket. Wouldn't take a dime back. Said a man's word was his handshake, and he believed in me." Tom's voice got a little rough on that last part, and he cleared his throat. Ray Hayes wasn't perfect, but he was the kind of guy who showed up when you needed him. No questions asked. My father, Ray Hayes, had been a complicated man, stubborn as hell, emotionally constipated like most men of his generation, and absolutely convinced that duct tape and determination could solve literally any problem. But Tom was right. Dad believed that your reputation was built on keeping your word, that handshakes meant something, and that if you said you were going to do something, you damn well better do it or die trying. He'd passed that down to me, for better or worse, which was probably why Harper's betrayal had cut so deep. In my world, you didn't sell someone's most prized possession for vacation money. You just didn't. And then I saw it. My Mustang, Cherry, sitting under the fluorescent lights like she'd just been waiting for me to show up. Tom had parked her in the center bay, and even in my current state of emotional devastation, I had to admit she looked beautiful. The candy apple red paint gleamed, the chrome accents caught the light, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. I walked toward the car slowly, almost afraid to touch it, like it might disappear if I moved too fast. This was the car my father had driven to my Little League games. The car he taught me to drive in when I was 15 in a parking lot behind the old grocery store. The car we'd restored together, piece by piece, in his garage while he told me stories about the original engine and the time he drag raced it in 1971 and won $50 off some punk kid who thought his Camaro was faster. "She's a beauty," Tom said quietly, standing beside me. "Your dad kept her pristine, and you did a hell of a job with the restoration work. I can see Ray in every detail." I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the cool metal under my palm, and something in my chest unclenched slightly. At least the car was okay. At least Harper hadn't sold it to some idiot who would have painted it neon green and installed a ridiculous spoiler and ruined everything my father had built. So what did he leave me? I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. You said there was something inside? Tom walked around to the driver's side and opened the door. 2 years ago, maybe 3 months before he passed, your dad called me up and asked me to install something. Said it was important. Said it was for you. But you weren't supposed to know about it unless something happened. He leaned into the car and pointed at the dashboard. Hidden compartment behind the radio. Custom job. Ray designed it himself. Made me promise not to tell a soul. I stared at the dashboard. The same dashboard I'd polished 100 times. The same radio I'd replaced the speakers for. The same setup I thought I knew like the back of my hand. Behind the radio? How the hell did I miss that? Because your father was smarter than you gave him credit for, Tom said with a small smile. And because he knew you'd never think to look there. The compartment is magnetic. Opens with a specific sequence. He reached over and pressed 3 buttons on the radio in a pattern, AM, FM, AM again, and then pulled. The entire radio face plate came away smoothly, revealing a hollow space behind it. Holy shit, I whispered. Yeah, Tom agreed. That was my reaction too when he showed me. Inside the compartment was a thick manila folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents, a sealed white envelope with my name, Mason, written across the front in my father's distinctive handwriting, and a small wooden box, maybe 4 inches square, made of dark walnut with brass hinges. Tom reached in carefully and pulled everything out, handing the items to me like they were made of glass. He told me you'd understand, Tom said, stepping back to give me space. Told me that when the time came, you'd know what to do with it all. I held the envelope in my hands, staring at my name written in pen that was slightly shaky. Dad's hands had started trembling near the end, the cancer and the chemo making everything harder. The envelope was sealed with actual wax, which was so dramatically my father that I almost laughed. He'd probably used one of those fancy wax seal kits he'd bought at some Renaissance fair Mom had dragged him to back in 2010. Did he tell you what any of this is? I asked Tom, not taking my eyes off the envelope. No, sir. And I didn't ask. Your father's business was his own. But he did say. Tom paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. He said you'd need it someday. Said Harper was going to show her true colors eventually, and when she did, you'd need everything in that compartment to protect yourself. My head snapped up. He said that? About Harper? Tom nodded slowly. He didn't trust her, Mr. Hayes. Didn't trust her from the day he met her. Said she reminded him of a woman who tried to con his own father back in the 70s. Said she had that same look in her eyes, like she was always calculating, always figuring out what everything was worth. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I know that's your wife I'm talking about, but your father was adamant. Made me swear I'd call you if she ever tried to sell the car. I looked down at the envelope again, then at the folder, then at the small wooden box. My father had seen this coming. He'd known, somehow, that Harper would eventually do something like this. And instead of telling me directly, because Ray Hayes wasn't the kind of man who said, I told you so, or interfered in his son's marriage, he'd planned ahead. He'd left me breadcrumbs. Or maybe not breadcrumbs. Maybe he'd left me a whole damn survival kit. Can I gestured vaguely at the car. Can I sit in it for a minute? While I open this? Take all the time you need, Tom said. I'll be in the office if you need anything. Coffee's fresh if you want some. He walked away, leaving me alone with my car and my father's final message. I climbed into the driver's seat, the leather creaking slightly, original leather that Dad had kept conditioned for decades. The interior smelled like leather, and that specific car smell that's impossible to describe but immediately recognizable. I adjusted the rearview mirror out of habit and caught my own reflection. I look like hell. But then again, finding out your wife is a mercenary and your dead father is still trying to parent you from beyond the grave will do that to a guy. I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. The envelope tore easier than I expected, probably because my hands were shaking like I'd just mainlined espresso directly into my veins. Inside was a single piece of paper, not fancy stationery or anything dramatic, just regular printer paper folded in thirds. Classic Dad. Why be fancy when functional gets the job done? I unfolded it carefully, half expecting it to disintegrate like some kind of ancient treasure map, and there it was, my father's handwriting, slightly shaky but still unmistakably his. The man had been dying of cancer and still wrote neater than I did on my best day. The letter started without preamble because Ray Hayes didn't believe in wasting time on pleasantries when there was important information to convey. Son, if you're reading this, your old man's gone. But don't panic. I didn't come back as a ghost in the carburetor, and I'm not haunting the glove box like some kind of automotive poltergeist. I just wanted you to know a few things I couldn't say in person because, let's face it, I was never good at the whole emotional heart-to-heart thing. Your mother used to say I had the emotional range of a socket wrench, and she wasn't wrong. I laughed, which turned into something dangerously close to a sob, which I swallowed down because I was sitting in a stranger's garage, and crying in a Mustang seemed like the kind of thing that would end up as a sad country song. I could practically hear Dad's voice as I read, that dry tone he used when he was trying to be funny, but also deadly serious. First things first, Harper's trouble. I know you don't want to hear it, and I know you think I'm just being an overprotective old bastard who doesn't think anyone's good enough for his son. And you're partially right. Nobody's good enough for you, because you're my kid, and I'm biased as hell. But Harper? She's a special kind of wrong. I've been investigating her for about a year now. Don't get mad. I did it because I love you, and because something didn't sit right with me from day one. Remember when she accidentally threw away my toolbox at your engagement party? That wasn't an accident. She wanted to see if you'd stand up to her, or if you'd just roll over. You rolled over, by the way. We'll work on that. I cringed because he was absolutely right. Harper had thrown away Dad's vintage toolbox, claiming she thought it was trash, and I'd just accepted her apology and moved on because I didn't want to cause drama. Dad had been pissed, but hadn't said anything beyond a tight-lipped, "It's fine," which in Ray Hayes' language meant, "This is absolutely not fine, but I'm choosing my battles." Anyway, I hired a private investigator, guy named Peter Sloan. Good man, discreet. Found some interesting things about your wife. Did you know she's been married before? Twice, actually. Both times to guys with money or assets. Both marriages lasted less than 3 years. Both ex-husbands ended up significantly broker than when they started. Coincidence? I'm thinking no. Wait, what? Harper had been married before? Twice? She'd told me I was her first husband, that she'd dated a lot, but never found the right guy until me. She'd cried when she told me that story, said I was the first man who really understood her. And I believed her because I'm apparently the kind of idiot who takes everything at face value and doesn't think to. I don't know. Google his fiancée before marrying her. I've got documentation in the folder. Marriage certificates, divorce decrees, court records. Her first husband was a real estate developer in Ohio. She convinced him to put her name on all his properties, then filed for divorce and took half of everything. Second husband was a tech guy in Seattle who made the mistake of giving her power of attorney when he was traveling for work. She cleaned out 3 bank accounts and disappeared before he even landed in Tokyo. He tried to sue, but she'd covered her tracks too well. My hands were shaking so badly now that the paper was rattling. I set it down on the steering wheel and took a few deep breaths that did absolutely nothing to calm me down. Harper had done this before, multiple times. This wasn't impulsive behavior or financial stress or any of the excuses I'd been making for her in my head. This was a pattern. This was a career. She's planning to take you for everything, Mason. I know it, and I think deep down, you know it too. She's already started, hasn't she? Selling things without asking? Making big financial decisions without your input? Talking about how you two should simplify and downsize. That's her playbook. She'll liquidate everything she can, convince you it's for the best, and then one day you'll wake up and she'll be gone with everything except your dignity and your dad's Mustang. Oh wait, if you're reading this, she probably already sold the car. Sorry, kid. I tried to prevent it by hiding this stuff here, but I couldn't exactly stop her without tipping you off to everything. Though I'm guessing the car being gone is probably what led you to Tom, so maybe it worked out the way it needed to. He was right. If Harper hadn't sold the Mustang, I'd never have gotten Tom's call. I'd still be walking around thinking my wife was just impulsive and bad with money, not a calculating con artist with a track record longer than my Netflix queue. My father had played this perfectly, like some kind of posthumous chess grandmaster making moves from beyond the grave. Here's what you need to do. Don't confront her yet. I know you want to. I know you're probably sitting in that car right now wanting to drive home and lose your mind at her, but don't. You need to be smart about this. She's done this before, and she's good at it. If you tip your hand too early, She'll lawyer up and disappear with whatever she hasn't already sold or transferred. In the folder, you'll find contact information for Peter Sloan. Call him. He's got more information than I could fit in this letter, and he's still actively monitoring her accounts. Yes, I paid him through the end of the year, so you're covered. There's also information about a safe deposit box at First National Bank. Box number 382. The key is in the wooden box with this letter. I grabbed the wooden box with shaking hands and opened it. Inside, nestled in red velvet like something out of a heist movie, was a small brass key with 382 engraved on it. Next to the key was a folded piece of paper with an address and a name. Peter Sloan, private investigator. My father had thought of everything. The safe deposit box has some things you're going to need. Money mostly. Stock certificates I've been holding on to since the 90s that have done better than I expected. I originally bought them thinking they'd be your inheritance someday. Something to help you retire or start a business or whatever you wanted. But now they're going to be your escape fund. Your start-over money. Your Harper can't touch this nest egg. Stock certificates. From the 90s. My brain immediately went to Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. All the companies that had turned $100 investments into small fortunes. Dad had been savvy about money when he wanted to be, even if he spent most of his time covered in grease and swearing at carburetors. I don't know exactly how much they're worth now. I'm writing this in 2023 and I'll be dead before the year's out, but I'm guessing it's substantial. Enough to make a difference. Enough to start over if you need to. The date hit me like a punch to the gut. He'd written this 2 years ago, when he was already sick, already knew he was dying, and instead of spending his last months feeling sorry for himself, he'd spent them protecting me from a woman he'd probably known was dangerous from the moment he met her. Son, I know this is a lot. I know you're probably angry at me for not telling you all this while I was alive. But you wouldn't have listened. You were in love, or you thought you were, and nothing I said would have changed your mind. You had to figure this out yourself. I just wanted to make sure you had the tools to survive it when you did. A few more things before I go. First, Tom Garner is a good man. Trust him. He'll help you get the car back if Harper sold it, and he won't charge you a fortune to do it. Second, don't beat yourself up too much about this. We all make mistakes. Hell, I married your mother after knowing her for 3 weeks, and that was the best decision I ever made. But I also bought a boat in 1987 that sank in the driveway before I ever got it to water, so nobody's batting 1,000. I smiled despite everything. The boat. Mom had never let him forget about that boat. It had sat in their driveway for 2 years before Dad finally admitted defeat and sold it for scrap. He'd claimed he was going to restore it, turn it into something magnificent. Instead, it had become a very expensive planter that leaked and smelled like mildew. Third, and this is important, you're stronger than you think you are. You've got more backbone than you give yourself credit for. You rebuilt this entire car from the ground up. You didn't give up even when the transmission fought you for 6 months. You figured it out. You can figure this out too. Be patient, be smart, and for God's sake, stop trusting women who hate motor oil. That's not a joke. If she can't appreciate a good engine, she can't appreciate you. I love you, kid. Always have, even when I was terrible at showing it. Make me proud. Dad. P.S. Your mother knows about all of this. She helped me set it up. When you're ready, call her. She'll help you through whatever comes next. And she'll probably say I told you so about 50 times, so brace yourself. I sat there in the driver's seat of my father's Mustang, holding a letter from a dead man who'd managed to be a better parent posthumously than most people are while alive, and I finally let myself cry. Not big, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that rolled down my face while I gripped the steering wheel and tried to process the fact that my father had loved me enough to spend his dying months building me a safety net I didn't even know I needed. My phone buzzed. A text from Harper. Where are you? We need to pick up my dress for Paris. It's ready at the boutique. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Harper could wait. Harper could wait a long damn time. Because I had phone calls to make, a safe deposit box to open, and apparently, a whole new future to figure out. One that hopefully didn't involve a wife who viewed my possessions as her personal ATM. I left Garner's shop with the folder tucked under my arm like it was nuclear launch codes, the wooden box with the key in my pocket, and my father's letter folded carefully in my wallet, because there was no way in hell I was leaving that thing anywhere Harper could find it. Tom had offered to hold on to the Mustang until I figured out what I wanted to do, And I'd agreed because bringing the car home right now would be like waving a red flag at a bull. A bull who'd already proven she had no problem selling said flag for airline tickets and overpriced baguettes. The drive to First National Bank took about 15 minutes, during which my brain went through approximately 700 different scenarios ranging from the stock certificates are worthless and Dad was being optimistic to the stock certificates are worth millions and I'm about to become the kind of person who owns a boat that doesn't sink in the driveway. Reality was probably somewhere in the middle, but my anxiety wasn't interested in reasonable middle grounds. My anxiety wanted to catastrophize everything and then catastrophize some more just for good measure. I pulled into the bank parking lot and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel and trying to remember how to be a normal human being who walks into a bank without looking like he's either about to rob the place or have a complete mental breakdown. Possibly both. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Yep, still looked like a guy who'd been emotionally destroyed by his wife and resurrected by his dead father's revenge plot. Very normal. Nothing suspicious here. The bank was one of those old-school buildings that still had marble floors and high ceilings. The kind of place that made you feel like you should be wearing a suit and speaking in hushed tones about important financial matters. I was wearing jeans with a hole in the knee and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, so I immediately felt underdressed. But whatever. If they were going to judge me, they could judge me while I accessed my mysteriously inherited stock certificates. The lobby was mostly empty except for an elderly couple arguing quietly about whether they'd remembered to pay their electric bill, and a young guy in a suit who looked fresh out of business school and deeply convinced he was going to be a millionaire by 30. Good luck with that, kid. I thought the same thing once, and now I'm here opening my dead father's safe deposit box to escape my con artist wife. I approached the nearest customer service desk where a woman who looked like she'd been working in banking since the invention of currency itself sat behind a nameplate that read, Susan Mitchell, Personal Banking Associate. She had short gray hair, glasses on a chain around her neck, and the expression of someone who'd seen every kind of financial disaster imaginable and was no longer impressed by human stupidity. Good morning, I said, trying to sound like a functional adult. I need to access a safe deposit box. Susan looked up from her computer and gave me the kind of once-over that suggested she was calculating both my net worth and my likelihood of being a waste of her time. Do you have your key? I pulled out the wooden box and extracted the brass key, setting it on the desk like I was presenting evidence in a trial. Box 382. She picked up the key, examined it with the scrutiny of someone who'd probably seen fake keys before, and then nodded. I'll need to see identification and verify your authorization. I handed over my driver's license, which had a photo from 5 years ago when I'd still had hope and marginally better hair. Susan typed something into her computer, frowned, typed some more, then picked up her phone and made a quiet call to someone in the back. This went on for what felt like 17 years, but was probably 3 minutes. I stood there trying not to fidget or look guilty of crimes I hadn't committed. Finally, she hung up and looked at me with what might have been respect or might have been suspicion. Hard to tell with Susan. Mr. Hayes, your father set this up with very specific instructions. You're the only authorized person, and there's a note here that says. She squinted at her screen. If my son shows up looking confused and possibly angry, that means everything went according to plan. Did your father have an unusual sense of humor? You have no idea, I said, and despite everything, I smiled. That was so perfectly Dad, leaving cryptic instructions in bank computers like some kind of financial Batman. Susan stood up with the kind of sigh that suggested her back hurt, and she was tired of dealing with people's drama. Follow me. She led me through a door marked, Authorized Personnel Only, and down a hallway that smelled like old money and carpet cleaner. We passed several offices where important banking people were having important banking conversations, and finally arrived at a heavy vault door that looked like it could survive a nuclear apocalypse. Susan did some kind of complicated unlocking procedure involving a key, a code, and probably a blood sacrifice, and the door swung open with a satisfying mechanical sound. Inside the vault were rows and rows of safe deposit boxes in various sizes, all numbered and locked. Susan walked to box 382, which was a medium-sized one, and used her master key in conjunction with my key to open it. She pulled out a long metal box and carried it to a small private room off to the side. Take all the time you need, she said, setting the box on the table. Just let me know when you're finished. She left and closed the door behind her, giving me privacy with whatever financial time bomb my father had left me. I sat down in the chair, which was surprisingly comfortable for a room designed for people to discover either their fortune or their ruin, and opened the box. Inside was a thick manila envelope, even more official-looking than the folder from the car. I opened it carefully, half expecting confetti or a spring-loaded snake because at this point, nothing would surprise me. Inside were stock certificates. Lots of them. They were printed on fancy paper with elaborate borders and official seals, the kind of thing you see in movies about old money and family fortunes. I spread them out on the table and started reading the company names: Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Intel, all purchased between 1995 and 1998, when my dad would have been in his early 50s and apparently had the foresight to bet on technology companies that most people thought were risky investments. There was also a handwritten note on a post-it stuck to one of the certificates. Check with the bank about current value. Don't faint. Dad, don't faint. Great advice, Dad. Really helpful. I gathered up all the certificates. There were 12 in total, and walked back out to Susan's desk, probably looking like a man who'd just discovered either buried treasure or buried problems. She looked up from her computer and raised an eyebrow. I need to know what these are worth, I said, setting the stack of certificates on her desk. Current market value. Susan's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion I'd seen from her. She picked up the first certificate, a Microsoft one for 500 shares purchased in 1996, and let out a low whistle. Mr. Hayes, these are going to need to be evaluated by our investment specialist. This could take. How long? I interrupted, because I needed to know if I was rich or just had expensive paper. Give me 30 minutes, she said, already picking up her phone. But Mr. Hayes, your father was either very lucky or very smart. Both, I said. Definitely both. I spent the next 30 minutes pacing in the lobby like an expectant father, except instead of waiting for news about a baby, I was waiting for news about whether my entire life was about to change. The young business school guy left. The elderly couple finished their argument and departed holding hands. A woman came in to deposit what looked like a small fortune in checks and left smiling. And I just paced. Finally, Susan emerged from her office with a printout and the expression of someone who was about to deliver news that would either make my day or ruin it. She gestured for me to follow her into a private consultation room, which seemed ominous. Rich people news or devastating people news? I couldn't tell. She sat down across from me and slid the printout across the table. Mr. Hayes, I've calculated the current value of all 12 stock certificates, accounting for splits, dividends, and current market prices. I looked down at the paper. There were a lot of numbers. My brain, which had been running on anxiety and coffee for the past 24 hours, struggled to make sense of them. Susan pointed to the bottom line with her pen. The total approximate value is $412,000. The room tilted slightly. Or maybe I tilted. Hard to tell. $412,000. My father had turned a few $1,000s, probably money he'd saved from doing side jobs and overtime at the plant, into nearly $500,000, and he'd just left it sitting in a bank vault like it was no big deal. Mr. Hayes? Susan's voice sounded far away. Are you all right? I'm fine, I lied. Just processing. Would you like to liquidate any of these holdings? Transfer them to an account? We can help you set up. All of them, I said, my voice sounding weird and hollow. I want to liquidate all of them. Today. Now. As soon as humanly possible. Susan blinked. That's a significant decision. Are you certain you don't want to speak with a financial advisor first? I'm certain, I said. My wife doesn't know about this money, and I need to make sure it stays that way. Understanding dawned in Susan's eyes. She'd probably seen this situation before. Desperate people trying to protect assets from spouses who couldn't be trusted. I see. We can set up a separate account in your name only. It'll take a few days to process all the sales, but we can expedite. Do it, I said. Whatever it takes. Expedite everything. Harper returned from Paris 3 days later, which was exactly 3 days too soon for my liking. I'd spent those 72 hours in what could only be described as productive paranoia. Meeting with Peter Sloan, the private investigator my dad had hired, organizing documents that proved my wife was basically a one-woman crime wave, and setting up a bank account so secure that it would take an act of God and several federal warrants for Harper to even know it existed. I'd also eaten approximately 0 proper meals and survived entirely on coffee and Sprite, which is not a diet I'd recommend, but definitely gets results when you're preparing for marital warfare. She breezed through the front door like she was arriving at a resort, dragging 2 new suitcases behind her that I definitely didn't remember her leaving with. Her hair was styled differently, some kind of French braid situation that probably cost more than my monthly car insurance. And she was wearing a beret. An actual, honest-to-God beret. Because apparently 3 days in Paris meant she needed to commit fully to the stereotype and come back looking like she was about to critique someone's cheese selection. "Mason," she called out, her voice doing that fake cheerful thing that made my teeth hurt. "I'm home. Come look at all the things I bought." Things she bought. With money from my car. From my father's legacy. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of what Dad's letter had said. Don't confront her yet. Be patient. Be smart. Play the long game. So instead of saying what I really wanted to say, which involved several creative uses of profanity and a detailed description of where she could stick her Eiffel Tower keychain, I walked into the living room with what I hoped was a neutral expression. "Hey," I said, channeling every ounce of mediocre acting ability I possessed. "How was the trip?" Harper's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning who'd just discovered that yes, Santa is real, and yes, he brought everything on the list plus a pony. "Oh my God, Mason, it was incredible. Paris is it's magical. The food, the art, the architecture. I took so many pictures." She pulled out her phone and started swiping through what appeared to be approximately 7,000 selfies of her standing in front of various French landmarks, each one with a slightly different pose and the same vacant expression. I nodded along, making appropriate sounds of interest while internally calculating how long I needed to maintain this charade before I could escape to the garage and scream into a toolbox. She'd gained a tan, or more likely had paid for one of those spray-tan things, and was wearing clothes I didn't recognize. New clothes. Expensive-looking clothes. Purchased with money that used to be my car. "I brought you back a present," she said, digging through one of her new suitcases. She pulled out a small box and handed it to me with the kind of flourish usually reserved for game show hosts revealing grand prizes. I opened it. Inside was an Eiffel Tower keychain. Plastic. Probably cost €3. This was my consolation prize for losing a car worth 6 figures. A plastic keychain that would break within a week. My father's ghost was probably somewhere shaking his head in disappointed disgust. "Thanks," I said, pocketing the keychain because throwing it across the room would have tipped my hand. "It's great. I knew you'd love it," Harper said, completely missing the sarcasm in my voice, or maybe just not caring. She'd always been remarkably good at hearing only what she wanted to hear. "Oh, and I picked up some macarons from this amazing little patisserie near Notre Dame. They're in the other suitcase. We can have them with wine later." Wine and macarons. How continental. How sophisticated. How absolutely tone-deaf considering she'd funded this entire trip by selling my emotional support vehicle without permission. But I smiled and nodded because Mason Hayes was now a man on a mission, and that mission required me to be the world's most convincing actor until I had all my ducks and my legal documentation in a row. Harper spent the next hour unpacking and showing me every single item she'd purchased, providing detailed stories about where she'd bought each thing and how much she'd paid, which was information I absolutely did not want and would have paid good money not to hear. She'd bought scarves, multiple scarves, because apparently one neck requires backup neck coverage, and several bottles of wine that she claimed were impossible to find in the States, but looked suspiciously similar to stuff I'd seen at the liquor store down the street for half the price. That night, we had dinner together for the first time since the Great Car Betrayal. Harper had ordered Thai food, her favorite, not mine, but that was par for the course, and we sat at the kitchen table like a normal couple doing normal couple things. Except I was a guy plotting his escape from a con artist, and she was a con artist who thought she'd gotten away with everything. She pushed some pad thai around her plate and gave me that look. You know the look. The one that says, "I'm about to say something you're not going to like, but I'm going to say it anyway and act surprised when you're upset." I'd seen that look before. Right before she'd announced she'd accidentally donated my entire vinyl collection to Goodwill, and right before she'd suggested we get rid of our dog because he was too much work. So, she started, twirling her fork in a way that suggested she'd been practicing this conversation in her head. I've been thinking. Always dangerous, I said, taking a sip of water because I didn't trust myself with anything stronger right now. She laughed like I'd made a joke instead of a thinly veiled observation about her thought processes typically ending in disaster. You've looked really tired lately, Mason. Stressed. I think this house is too much for us. Too much maintenance, too much space we don't use. And honestly, the market's really good right now. We could sell, make a profit, and move somewhere easier. Smaller, more manageable. And there it was. The next step in her playbook, exactly as my father had predicted in his letter. She'd sold the car, and now she wanted the house. What would be next? My kidney, my retirement account, my collection of vintage tools that were the only things keeping me sane? I set down my fork carefully, buying myself a few seconds to make sure my voice came out steady. You want to sell the house? Not want exactly. More like, it makes sense, you know? We could take the equity and travel more. See the world. Live a little. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine, her touch feeling like a snake wrapping around my wrist. Don't you want to live a little, Mason? What I wanted was for her to spontaneously develop a conscience, but that seemed about as likely as me sprouting wings and flying to the moon. I don't know, Harper. This is my dad's house. He left it to me. There are memories here. Exactly, she said, squeezing my hand in what she probably thought was a reassuring gesture, but felt more like a hostage negotiation. It's your dad's house, not our house. Don't you think it's time to make our own memories? Our own life. Our own life. She kept saying our, like we were a team, like we were partners building something together, when really she was a demolition crew disguised as a wife, systematically destroying everything I'd built before she arrived. But Dad was right. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more time, more evidence, more preparation. So instead of telling her exactly where she could shove her ideas about selling my house, I smiled. It probably looked more like a grimace, but Harper wasn't paying that much attention anyway. You're right. I lied, the words tasting like battery acid in my mouth. Maybe I should think about selling something. Her eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting jackpot. Really? You mean it? Sure, I said, already planning my next moves. Why not? Change is good, right? What I didn't say was that the thing I was planning to sell was her expectations, her assumptions, and her belief that I was going to keep rolling over and playing dead while she auctioned off my entire existence piece by piece. Harper practically bounced out of her chair and came around the table to hug me, which took considerable willpower not to flinch away from. She smelled like expensive perfume she'd probably bought in Paris with car money. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Mason. I was worried you'd be difficult. Difficult. That was rich. I was being the opposite of difficult. I was being strategic. There's a difference. That night, after Harper had gone to bed early, jet-lagged, apparently, though I suspected it was more champagne and self-satisfaction, I went out to the garage. My new war room. The place where Harper never ventured because it smelled like bad decisions, which was ironic considering she was the worst decision I'd ever made and she didn't seem bothered by her own presence. I'd hidden copies of everything in the garage. Dad's letter, the documentation Peter had given me, bank statements showing Harper's suspicious transactions, marriage certificates from her previous victims, and a timeline I'd been building of every questionable thing she'd done since we got married. It was all tucked inside a toolbox that looked like every other toolbox in my collection, hidden in plain sight where Harper would never think to look because she considered tools to be mysterious masculine objects beyond her comprehension. I pulled out my phone and called Peter Sloan. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly and awake despite it being almost 11 at night. Hayes, how'd it go? She's already pushing to sell the house, I said, keeping my voice low even though Harper was 2 floors away and snoring like a congested lumber mill. Exactly like Dad said she would. They always do, Peter said, and I could hear him typing in the background. It's the next logical step. Liquidate the small stuff first, then go for the big assets. Classic con artist behavior. How'd you respond? Played along. Told her I'd think about it. She thinks she's winning. Good. Keep her comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes. He paused. I've got updates on those accounts I've been monitoring. She opened a new credit card last week. In your name. My blood pressure spiked so fast I got lightheaded. What? Credit card. Your name? forged signature. She's already run up about 8 grand on it. Luxury purchases, mostly. I've got the documentation ready for when you need it. $8,000. In 1 week. On a credit card I didn't authorize. That was fraud. That was illegal. That was exactly the kind of evidence I needed to bury her. Keep gathering everything, I said. I want this airtight. It will be. Trust me, Hayes. I've done this before. She's not as smart as she thinks she is. I hung up and sat there in the dim garage light, surrounded by tools and car parts and the ghost of my father's Mustang. Operation Comeback was officially underway, and Harper had no idea that the exhausted, compliant husband she'd left behind when she went to Paris had died somewhere over the Atlantic. The man who'd come back was someone new, someone patient, someone who'd learned from his father that sometimes the best revenge is the kind your enemy never sees coming. I looked up at the empty space where Cherry used to sit and whispered, "Thanks, Dad. I've got it from here." Peter Sloan showed up at my house the next afternoon wearing a trench coat that absolutely screamed, "Divorce detective who's seen some things and has opinions about alimony." It was 72 degrees outside, perfect fall weather, the kind where you maybe need a light jacket at most. But Peter had committed to the full noir private investigator aesthetic and wasn't about to let something as trivial as appropriate seasonal attire get in the way of his brand. The trench coat was beige, slightly wrinkled, and looked like it had been purchased sometime during the Reagan administration and hadn't been cleaned since. He also wore a fedora, which took serious confidence considering most men looked like they were either going to a costume party or having a midlife crisis when they put on a fedora. Peter somehow pulled it off, probably because he genuinely didn't care what anyone thought about his fashion choices. "Hayes," he said, shaking my hand with the grip of a man who'd probably punched his way through a few investigations. "Sorry for your loss. Your father was a hell of a guy." "Thanks," I said, ushering him inside quickly because the last thing I needed was Harper coming home early and finding a private investigator on our doorstep. She'd gone to some kind of hot yoga class. The kind where people pay $50 to sweat in a room heated to approximately the surface temperature of Mercury, while someone named Moonbeam tells them to breathe into their authenticity. She'd be gone for at least 2 hours, which gave us plenty of time to go through the evidence that was about to blow up my marriage like a controlled demolition. Peter followed me to the garage, glancing around at the various tools and car parts with the appreciative eye of someone who understood that a man's garage was basically his therapy office. "This is where you worked on the Mustang?" "Yeah, 10 years of my life, right in this spot." I gestured to the empty space that still felt like an open wound. "Harper sold it while I was out buying groceries." "Classy move." "They never are," Peter said, setting down a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had survived several decades and possibly a world war. "Classy, I mean. The ones who do this kind of thing. They're efficient, calculating, and really good at making you think you're crazy for questioning them. But classy? Never." He opened the briefcase and pulled out several manila folders, each one thick with documentation. This wasn't some half-assed investigation. This was the kind of thorough research that could probably hold up in multiple courts across several states. Peter might dress like he was auditioning for a film noir remake, but the man was clearly excellent at his job. "Let's start with the basics," Peter said, pulling out a folder labeled Harper Hayes, Background. He opened it and spread several documents across my workbench. "Your wife's real name is Harper Christine Dalton. She's 37, not 32 like she told you. She's been married 3 times before you, not 0 times like she claimed." 3 times. 3 times. I'd asked her directly when we first started dating if she'd ever been married, and she'd looked me dead in the eye with tears forming and said, "No, you're my first real relationship. Everyone else was just practice." And I believed her because I'm apparently the kind of sucker who takes pathological liars at face value and doesn't think to run a basic background check before proposing. First husband was Kenneth Dalton, married in 2009, divorced in 2011. Real estate developer in Columbus, Ohio. She convinced him to put her name on 6 rental properties he owned, claiming it was romantic to build their empire together. 2 years later, she filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and walked away with half of everything. Kenneth lost 4 of the 6 properties in the settlement. Last I checked, he was managing a restaurant and still paying off debt from the divorce. Peter slid over a photo of Kenneth Dalton. He looked like a decent guy, regular-looking dude in his 40s, maybe a little soft around the middle, the kind of guy who probably coached Little League and paid his taxes on time and never saw Harper coming until it was too late. Second husband was Marcus Chun, tech consultant in Seattle. Married 2013, divorced 2015. This one was slicker. She convinced him she had business experience and needed power of attorney to handle his finances while he traveled for work. Marcus spent 6 months in Tokyo working on some big contract, and when he came back, 3 of his bank accounts were empty. She'd transferred everything to offshore accounts, filed for divorce, and disappeared. He tried to sue, but she'd covered her tracks too well. By the time his lawyers found anything concrete, she was gone. Jesus, I muttered, looking at Marcus's photo. Asian guy, professional looking, probably smart as hell in his field, but completely blindsided by a woman who'd made a career out of financial destruction. Third husband was James Rothman, married 2017, divorced 2019. Investment banker in Denver. She got him to co-sign on several business loans for a catering company she claimed she was starting. The business never existed. She took the loan money, about $120,000, and vanished. James is still paying off those loans. He'll probably be paying them off until he's 60. Peter pulled out another folder, this one labeled Current Activity. Inside were printouts of forum posts, emails, and what looked like social media messages. This is where it gets interesting. Harper's active on several online forums under different usernames. She posts on caregiver forums, estate planning groups, and divorce advice boards, always asking the same kinds of questions. How to convince elderly relatives to sell property, how to access spousal assets, how to hide money during a divorce. He handed me several printouts. I read through them, my stomach turning with each one. Posts asking things like, how do I convince my husband his house is too much work? And what's the best way to liquidate assets without raising suspicion? And my personal favorite, if my spouse inherits something, is it automatically marital property? She's been planning this since before you got married, Peter said flatly. Your father suspected it early on, which is why he hired me 3 years ago. I've been monitoring her activities ever since. Why didn't Dad just tell me? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Would you have believed him? Peter asked, and he had a point. 3 years ago, I'd been head over heels convinced Harper was the love of my life. If Dad had shown up with this information, I would have accused him of being paranoid and overprotective and probably would have doubled down on my relationship just to prove him wrong. Humans are stupid that way. Peter pulled out another folder, this one significantly thicker. Here's where we stand now. In the past 3 years, Harper has opened 4 credit cards in your name without your knowledge, taken out a personal loan using forged documents, sold your car without authorization, attempted to access your father's estate before probate was complete, and most recently, tried to add her name to the deed of this house by filing fraudulent paperwork at the county recorder's office. She what? I nearly knocked over my coffee. She tried to add her name to my house. Last week, the filing was rejected because the signature didn't match, but she tried. I've got copies of everything. He slid over more documents. Credit card statements showing thousands in charges I never authorized, loan applications with my forged signature, and a partially completed deed transfer that made my blood boil. Why didn't she just rob a bank? I asked, genuinely confused about why someone would go through this much effort when there were presumably easier ways to steal money. Seems like it would involve less paperwork. Peter actually smiled at that. Too much paperwork, ironically. Bank robbery requires planning, execution, and then you've got to deal with dye packs, surveillance, FBI involvement. This way, marriage fraud, identity theft, asset manipulation, it's all civil court. Harder to prosecute, easier to claim it was a misunderstanding or marital dispute. She's betting that most victims won't pursue it because they're embarrassed or too emotionally destroyed to fight back. He wasn't wrong. Looking at the photos of Harper's previous husbands, they all had that same shell-shocked expression. The look of men who'd been hit by a truck they never saw coming and were still trying to figure out what happened. So what do we do now? I asked, feeling simultaneously furious and weirdly calm. Having evidence was powerful. Having this much evidence was basically having a nuclear weapon in a knife fight. Now we finish gathering everything and wait for her to make one more mistake, Peter said. She's getting sloppy. The fraudulent credit cards, the deed filing. She's overconfident. She thinks you're too passive to fight back, and that's when they get careless. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything: bank statements, emails, social media posts, testimony from previous victims. Kenneth and Marcus had both agreed to provide statements, and a timeline that showed Harper's systematic approach to destroying my financial life. Peter had even tracked down the guy she'd sold my Mustang to, Tom Garner, and verified that Harper had undervalued the car by at least $70,000, probably hoping to pocket the difference later. She's digging her own grave with a golden shovel, Peter observed, organizing the documents into neat piles. And she doesn't even realize she's standing in the hole. By the time Peter left, trench coat and fedora firmly in place, because commitment to aesthetic is important, I had copies of everything stored in 3 different locations. My garage toolbox, a safety deposit box Peter had helped me set up under my name only, and an encrypted cloud drive that Harper couldn't access even if she suddenly developed computer skills beyond Facebook stalking and online shopping. I stood in the garage after Peter drove away, surrounded by evidence of my wife's betrayal, and felt something I hadn't felt in days: hope. Not the naive, everything will work out kind of hope. The cold, calculated, I have the upper hand kind of hope. The kind that comes from knowing you're playing chess while your opponent still thinks you're playing checkers. Harper came home an hour later, sweaty and smug from hot yoga, carrying a green smoothie that probably cost more than my lunch. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing my cheek like a normal wife who hadn't committed multiple felonies before breakfast. "Productive," I said, smiling in a way that probably looked slightly unhinged, but I was past caring. "Really productive." She didn't notice. She never did. And that was going to be her downfall. Just when I thought I'd reached peak insanity for the month. Which, let's be honest, was setting a pretty high bar considering my wife had already sold my inheritance and tried to forge my name on enough documents to warrant her own true crime documentary. Tom Garner called again. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was elbow deep in organizing evidence like some kind of discount lawyer preparing for the trial of the century, and my phone lit up with his number. "Mr. Hayes," Tom said without preamble, and I could hear the barely contained amusement in his gravelly voice. "You're not going to believe this, but your wife is here. Right now? Trying to sell me your Mustang." Again, I nearly dropped my phone into my coffee. "She's what? Trying to sell me the same car she already sold me last week. Except this time, she's got forged documents with your signature authorizing the sale. Private sale, she says. Wants cash. $40,000. He paused. "I thought you'd want to know before I, handled the situation." Handled the situation. That was a delicate way of saying, before I call the cops on your criminally stupid wife. I grabbed my keys so fast I almost dislocated my shoulder. "Don't let her leave. I'm on my way. And Tom, you might want to have someone official standing by. Way ahead of you," he said. "I've got 2 detectives who've been wanting to talk to her about some other matters. Credit card fraud, identity theft, that kind of thing. Your friend Peter gave them a heads up that she might try something like this. Peter Sloan, you beautiful trench coat wearing genius." I made a mental note to buy that man the biggest bottle of whiskey money could buy, possibly several bottles, maybe an entire distillery. The drive to Garner's shop took 12 minutes, during which I oscillated between righteous fury and the kind of hysterical laughter that probably would have gotten me pulled over if any cops had seen me. Harper was trying to sell my car twice. The same car. It was like she'd watched Ocean's 11 and thought, I could do that, but dumber and without any of the planning or competence. When I pulled into the lot, I saw Harper's BMW parked near the entrance. The BMW she'd bought last year, claiming it was an investment in our future, which apparently meant her future, not mine. And next to it, an unmarked police car trying very hard to look casual and failing spectacularly. I parked my truck and walked in, trying to appear calm, which was difficult considering I felt like a mixture of a volcano about to erupt and a game show contestant who'd just realized he was about to win the grand prize. Inside, Tom stood behind his desk looking like a man thoroughly enjoying the show, while Harper paced near the office wearing designer sunglasses indoors. Always a sign of either a celebrity or someone making catastrophically bad decisions, and a silk scarf that screamed, "I just committed fraud," and thought I looked good doing it. She was on her phone, probably Googling how to sell stolen car faster, or countries without extradition treaties. 2 detectives sat in the waiting area pretending to read car magazines. One was a woman in her 40s with the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of human stupidity and was no longer impressed. The other was a younger guy who looked fresh out of the academy and deeply excited to be part of an actual arrest that didn't involve drunk college students. Tom saw me and gave the slightest nod. Showtime. Harper spotted me and pulled off her sunglasses, her face cycling through confusion, annoyance, and then landing on that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. Mason, what are you doing here? I was just handling some paperwork about the car. You know, getting our affairs in order like we discussed. Affairs in order, I repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling fraud now? Her smile flickered like a light bulb about to die. What are you talking about? The detective stood up, and the older one pulled out her badge. Harper Hayes? I'm Detective Miranda Reyes. We need to talk about some credit card accounts, forged documents, and this vehicle you're attempting to sell. Harper's face went white, then red, then back to white. It was like watching someone's brain short-circuit in real time. You can't arrest me, she sputtered, looking between me and the detectives like someone would surely tell her this was a prank. My husband's car isn't even that valuable. Tom, bless him, chose that exact moment to chime in. Ma'am, this vehicle is currently valued at approximately $180,000. And you already sold it to me once, which makes this attempted second sale particularly interesting from a legal standpoint. Harper turned to me, her eyes desperate. Mason, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them. No, I said simply. It was maybe the most satisfying word I'd ever spoken. Just one syllable. Clean. Final. Perfect. Detective Reyes read Harper her rights while her partner began taking photos of the forged documents Harper had brought. I stood there watching my wife realize that her golden shovel grave-digging operation had finally reached bedrock, and honestly, I'd never felt more alive. Weeks later, Harper's mugshot made the local news, and let me tell you, orange is definitely not the new black when you're facing 5 years for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. The judge hadn't been impressed with her tears or her claims that this was all a big misunderstanding between husband and wife. Turns out, forging someone's signature 12 times stops being a misunderstanding and starts being a felony somewhere around signature number 2. Paris never looked so far away. Tom brought my Mustang back on a sunny Saturday morning, driving it himself because he said a car like that deserved respect. Your dad would be proud, Mason, he said, handing me the keys like he was passing me the Olympic torch. He built this car for a man who'd learn how to fight back. I ran my hand over Cherry's hood, felt the cool metal still warm from the drive, heard the engine ticking as it cooled. My father hadn't just left me a car. He'd left me wisdom disguised as horsepower, a survival guide wrapped in candy apple red paint and chrome. That night, I took the Mustang out for the first time in what felt like forever. Windows down, engine purring like a satisfied cat that had just caught the mouse it had been chasing. The fall air whipped through the cabin, and I could almost hear Dad laughing in the passenger seat, that rough chuckle he'd make when things worked out exactly like he'd planned. I looked up at the darkening sky and said, "Thanks, old man. You saved me again." Then I added, "And don't worry, next time I'm dating someone, I'm making sure she can tell a carburetor from a coffee grinder. Maybe run a background check too. Possibly hire Peter Sloan for a full investigation before the first date." The Mustang's engine growled in what I chose to interpret as approval. If you think this is wild, you haven't heard anything yet. The real madness lives in my audiobook, Brutal Cheating Stories That Shocked the World. Click the link in the pinned comment and dive in. It is betrayal, exposure, and karma on full volume.